Hello, this is Mary Mack. I'm Enterprise Technology Counsel for ZyLAB, and I'm pleased to bring you this webcast, eDiscovery Proof Your Email Archive. We have wonderful speakers today, but before I go there, let me just let you know that we're very interested in the questions that you may have, and if you would type them into the chat box, I'll be monitoring that and directing the questions to the appropriate presenter. And some of them I may save towards the end, but as much as I can, I'm going to intersperse them so that you'll be able to have an interactive conversation. So our speakers today are two of the people who've been laboring in the field of information governance and eDiscovery for, shall we say, well, I'll just say decades instead of eons. But Jason Barron, you may know him as the star of the film A Decade of Discovery. He's a co-founder of the Information Governance Institute. He's an integral part of Drinker Biddle's information governance and eDiscovery practice. He's the former director of litigation at the National Archives of the United States, and we are delighted to have him share some of his insights and some of the work that he did when he was in the government, and then now some of the insights that he's gaining while he's on the other side of the government wall. Joining him is my colleague, Jan Schultes. He's the Chief Strategy Officer and the co-founder of ZyLAB, and he is also the Extraordinary Chair, Text Mining at the University of Maastricht. He has been working with machine learning, text classification, eDiscovery, information governance, information management, and those of you who are on the webcast who remember DOS, ZyLAB was the first search, desktop search for DOS way back in the day, and he has taken the company in new and exciting directions ever since. So the two of them are going to have a nice conversation that will give participants in this webcast some very concrete things to work with, in addition to some of the more theoretical underpinnings of information governance. Our agenda today, we'll be talking about eDiscovery proofing your email archives because of litigation and regulation, what's going on in records retention and email archiving, and then Jason has this wonderful capstone policy that was integral in developing that he'll be talking about that simplifies compliance with record retention and regulatory retention of information. And then Jan's going to talk a little bit about the technical challenges and how to solve them. So Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks Mary, and thanks Jan. Delighted to be part of a ZyLAB webinar. ZyLAB is an important sponsor of the Information Governance Initiative, which is a new think tank in this area, and I will be putting shameless plugs in throughout the webinar for the IGI. The issues that we confront in 2015, it's a little like Groundhog Day for eDiscovery and email archiving. We have been in the soup on email for a couple of decades, and we should have sophisticated approaches. We're trying all the time to be using the best software to do a better job of email archiving, but there are some simple truths that are out there that we really need to sort of make sure we're all on the same page of. One simple truth is that there's a litigation minefield out there. Most of the major cases that are in the eDiscovery area involve email. Email is the gotcha medium that we all know now. There are other ways to communicate these days, but for a long time it has been. And in U.S. litigation, courts are not afraid to sanction parties for failing to preserve evidence under what they call spoliation. They often do so with a measure of hindsight, looking back to what should have been preserved. That includes email and other forms of electronically stored information, or what we call ESI. And the kind of record-keeping solutions that in most places, both in the public sector and the private sector, that are in place are prone to being second-guessed because they feel ad hoc. They feel that they haven't been sort of fully integrated into corporate business lines. And so from the get-go, in this webinar, whatever, people should be thinking about fundamentally what kind of conversations we're having about not just email, but about electronic records generally as a matter of information governance in whatever institution we're in. Mary, next slide. So this is my experience going back a decade, which is that when I was privileged to be the Director of Litigation of the National Archives, position I held for 13 years after coming from the Justice Department, I was involved in a big tobacco case. And the world of a decade ago is very much like the world that we practice in today. There are some big changes, but fundamentally we are, think of a funnel. We are taking huge amounts of data, and mostly emails in litigation in a large number of cases. Emails are very important. Of course, there are other forms of ESI that are out there. But in my case, I had 20 million White House emails as part of a tobacco lawsuit, and I used keywords to sift them down to about a couple 100,000 documents with hits, and then went through it manually and looked at what was privileged and what was not, and came up with 100,000 documents. That process took 6 months, 25 persons. We're smarter today than that, and we have to be smarter given the volumes of email that we confront. So next slide. The reality today is that we're in a much bigger universe than even that 20 million figure. Not in every case, but in an increasingly large percentage of cases, we are in this information inflation era. This Lehman Brothers investigation that I'm referencing on this slide came about after 2008 with the financial meltdown on Wall Street, and there was an investigation. There was a 350 billion page universe, and there was a narrowing of the collection by using dozens and dozens of Boolean search terms to get down to a certain number of documents, which were then reviewed by contract attorneys, 70 contract attorneys, 40 million pages. This can't be the way that we operate. So part of the in the future, because we just don't have enough people, we don't have enough time, resources to do this kind of huge document review using traditional methods. But the key here is that there are demands, the demands on corporations from the compliance and investigation side, as well as in eDiscovery, and not just corporations, agencies too. It demands on all institutions to preserve what it might be relevant evidence, and that preservation function leads necessarily to considerations of how we're going to do that and how best to do it for email means email archiving. Next slide. And I'm going to keep talking, Barry, but feel free to interrupt and weigh in. But from the 2005 on, we've been in this world, 2006 for the federal rules changes. But 2005, the Supreme Court recognized that there's a life cycle to document retention. And so in the case of Arthur Andersen. And so there is a notion here that in whatever archiving process we do, we want to have an end state solution which allows for defensible disposition, for deletion of stuff. It's not a question, even though I am a big proponent, as you will see in a few minutes, of capstone methods for capturing email in an archive, but I'm also for being smart about how to go about deletion. And we don't want to keep everything forever. that's the de facto default in the world, but that's not where we want to be as institutions. Anyway, the Supreme Court recognized in some sense that there's a life cycle. Next slide. This life cycle could be very interesting when it comes to the public sector and also in the private sector. Maybe I should amend this slide, because there are certainly in the public sector there is a notion of permanent records. Permanent records versus temporary records. Temporary records could be very ephemeral, could be a day or a week or a month. Permanent records are life of the republic, forever. That's what federal agencies have to deal with. In the private sector, we also have schedules that are in place that do, to some extent, account for some corporate records being permanent in nature. And if we just step back, thinking about what means permanent, this is a very big issue. No one who's part of this webinar listening has really dealt with a 50-year electronic record, let alone something that is to be preserved for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's a big problem out there, and it's matching up retention spans. And if I don't get to it later, I do want to say that part of the trick here for email archiving is not just putting a vault in place, not putting just one storage technology in place. It's thinking through a process, which means simplifying legacy record schedules. That's extremely important for institutions. I've seen it now in my practice in the private sector. I saw it in the public sector that they're too granular an approach to records retention, too 20th century. We're in a 21st century mode where we need to be capturing stuff and filtering it in smart ways. Next slide. Now there are a large number of regulations that deal with retention spans in terms of regulatory compliance in the private sector. And so we've listed a whole bunch of them here on this slide. I'm going to let Jan speak to his experience in both the EU and the US. But it is increasingly the case that in the private sector we need to think about 7-year spans for email under Sarbanes-Oxley and other lengthening periods of time that require us to essentially be thinking about the archiving of email, the archiving of records, far beyond what we have in the past. And so it may not be in your corporation, maybe not in your institution. You may not be hit in a particular vertical that's under some of these statutes, but if you are, you've got obligations, compliance obligations and retention obligations to preserve email. Jan, do you want to speak to what the slide's talking about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what we see in the UK is there's a couple of very interesting developments. First of all, as you may have heard in the US, that recently the European Council has approved the latest version of our new data protection regulations, which now have to go to the European Parliament, which may take a little while. Nobody knows how long that's going to take. But it should be soon. And after that, every country has like 2 years to implement these new legislation. And basically, one of the major changes is that instead of having 26 different privacy regulations in Europe, we'll have one. It will be kind of a superset of all of the regulations we have right now. And one of the big changes is that every individual in Europe can ask any company or any organization operating in Europe for full disclosure of all of its details of that individual. And right now that's only possible in Germany and Austria, but soon it will be possible everywhere. And then there's a lot of other changes also relating to Freedom of Information Acts in Europe, sometimes also referred to as Public Records Acts. And although it may take up to 2 years, but these changes are definitely going to come through. Does that answer your question, Jason?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a good précis there. I must say that I have encountered in private sector practice, especially under SEC and FINRA rules, very serious controls that are needed on email archiving for both preservation purposes and monitoring purposes, and so it has. It's clear to me that we need to make sure that in whatever institution we're in, we are cognizant of the rules of the road for what's happening in our vertical. Okay, so the next slide, Mary, is just my feel-good slide that, of course, email is still out there 20 years later than the 1990s, with being the 800-pound gorilla. And the next slide after that, we understand that it is a long transition to email archiving, given that where some institutions have been. There have been a variety of approaches to the preservation of email in the past. If we go to the next slide, one of the standard approaches is that is print to paper, which has been the government solution for the last 2 decades. We are doing something about that, and we'll talk about that in just a minute or so on the slides. Beyond print to paper, though, you go to the next slide, Mary. We have other strategies for preservation of email and in terms of e-record keeping. Default backup tapes, disaster recovery backup tapes. They are have been thought of as a storage device. If anybody on the webinar still believes that their backup tapes that are in the basement somewhere are a good default, I can tell you that there are tremendous costs involved for remediation and restoration of backups, and so we should have a conversation about that. The preservation of online, of ad hoc folders. When I give talks and I ask who is doing electronic record keeping, get a lot of hands up that from a Microsoft environment or whatever, that individuals are saving files, saving records to PST folders or otherwise. That isn't what at least some of us would consider to be preservation for the enterprise, because the enterprise as a whole doesn't have knowledge of what is particularly in individual folders, and so it may or may not work depending on your institution. There are some practices of DoD 501 and 5.2 in the government sector for aligning record keeping certifications for software. Those are a very good benchmark to meet, but in many cases the 501 and 5.2 practice has suffered from what all of these strategies suffered from, which is that individuals are involved in actually tagging or making sure that records are preserved somewhere. And there's a litany. There's essentially a whole field of failures here in the profession, where millions of dollars have been spent on deployment of schemes that rely too heavily on individuals doing tagging, whether it's print to paper or dragging and dropping or otherwise. And so the least worst solution in a world that's not utopia is email archiving, and I'm a big proponent of email archiving. All right, next slide. This represents a tree, which is an organization's collective knowledge. And every user, the question is, how do you get that knowledge into one place, not just on branches of the tree, not just in that dimension? All right, next slide. So I have up here a slide on email archiving, defined as an automated process for preserving inbound and outbound messages. Anybody can look up a Wikipedia definition or a Sedona glossary definition. Sedona glossary is excellent on all range of technical subjects in this area, and it's a free download. Next slide. Where ZyLAB, what Mary has done, and Jan has put together a very good paper on talking about the importance of email and the importance of making sure that we capture it for many purposes, including both for litigation and compliance measures. So you should look at that product. Next slide. we're beyond email, of course, but this webinar is about email. We know that text messaging is out there, and there should be a conversation in any institution about also archiving chat and text where appropriate, or other forms of collaborations that are either social on the web or otherwise. And so any means of communication that generates business records is fair game for consideration in archiving. Next slide. And of course we also are, all of us are talking about moving to the cloud for an archiving scheme. It is very important to have a conversation with the C-suite early on about embedding records management. What needs to work for your institution is something that we should be talking about from the get-go, from the start of any procurement, from the start of any deployment to the cloud. Otherwise, it is too late to bolt on records management when you have put up 1 million objects in the cloud. So that is part of the dynamic here. It's part of what we would consider to be part of information governance, which is to have an early conversation about archiving no matter where the deployment is. All right, next slide. I come from 33 years in the government, and so I was delighted at the end of my time at the National Archives to be part of a process where the first thing that we did was we did something that had not been done since Harry Truman, which is to have President Obama actually sign a memorandum that represents a step forward for the government. And next slide, Mary. The memo that was signed in 2011 from the President said it recognized that there need to be a transformation in government of what constituted record-keeping practices based on technology and based on the surge of information overwhelming agency systems. So in my view, this was a coup of some sort to get President Obama to issue a memo. He's sort of the ultimate C-suite guy. And if we could do it, working the General Counsel of the National Archives and others going up through OMB, then everyone on this webinar should feel empowered to find a champion in your enterprise to get the job done in terms of moving the conversation both about email archiving and about other matters of governance. Next slide. In that memo, President Obama said proper records management is the backbone of open government. And so how do you accomplish open government beyond just putting data sets up on the web? All right, next slide. What the archivist did after President Obama issued his memo, basically the memo said to the archivist OMB, do something. And what was done was a directive issued in August 2012 which said two important things. One, by December 31, 2019, all federal agencies have to manage permanent records in an electronic way so that it can be accessioned into the National Archives. So the National Archives will not accept paper on a day-forward basis after 2019. The second is that by December 31, 2016, federal agencies will manage their email, all of it, permanent and temporary, in accessible electronic formats. That means no more print to paper. It also means that agencies are expected to come up with strategies for archiving of email, which will satisfy both the legal obligations with respect to litigation, as well as eDiscovery, as well as any other access laws that are out there and any other demands on agencies. And so it's a very important mandate. Both of these dates looked a lot further away in 2012 than they are in 2015. And I have been urging my friends inside the government to treat this with some level of immediacy. Next slide. So the process optimization problem is what I've alluded to, which is that we all get caught up in the software making us do something and do something hundreds of times during a day, which is to exercise record keeping. And we've got to get away from that paradigm. So I have put all my eggs in the basket of email archiving and advanced search for purposes of going forward. And we can talk about auto-categorization of records, and we can talk about other strategies for doing smart filtering and disposition. But the immediate problem is people who are not complying with whatever is being expected of them because they have to do it hundreds and hundreds of times a day. Next slide. John Mancini, my good friend, president of AIM, has said the same thing, which is, if by traditional records management you mean manual stuff, the idea that you get busy people to care about complicated retention schedules or drag and drop and apply metadata is ridiculous. Now I know that these words are challenging to a crowd of people that I spent a lot of time with in our records management crowd that are into very serious appraisal of objects. But we live in a world of big data, and the volumes are just too much for all of us to handle. So we need another plan. Next slide. What we came up with in government, what we were looking for is an easy button. That's elusive in terms of extra keystrokes. But we were looking for an app, basically a tagging scheme to categorize information. If possible, to use supervised learning techniques, much as that we've learned in eDiscovery about technology assisted review and predictive coding. But what we really aim for is a rule-based and a role-based records management system that would accompany the archiving of email and applying advanced search. And so, next slide. Our capstone policy that was developed in the last few years, which is going to be rolled out on a voluntary basis by any number of agencies over the next couple of years, is essentially a schema where key senior officials are creating permanent records, and everyone else is creating temporary records, non-senior official email records, and records designated as temporary, held for some set retention period. There will be a general record schedule coming out from the National Archives for Government that sets some period of time, whether it's 7 years or some other baseline period for temporary stuff. But it is essentially, the capstone policy is a carve-out from the world of record retention as we've known it. So another way to, Mary, if you advance the slide, it is you take a look at sort of a pyramid and think about the top level of an agency or any kind of organization. You have a small number of officials that are essentially senior people, the equivalent of the C-suite in government, senior executive service people. And those in an agency, let's say an agency has 3,000 people, they have 50 people who are designated as capstone accounts. Their email would be deemed to be permanent, both sent and received. There might be some exceptions. You can put in rules for personal email from spouses or children or whatever. But at the end of the day, those emails that are all designated by role are permanent. Everyone else's is temporary. You're not applying a record schedule that goes by substance and by series. You're carving it out from the world of record schedules as we know it. And this schema may well be applicable in situations in other contexts, both state and local government, but also in corporations that have some measure of a regulated crowd of individuals that are tagged as needing to be under some sort of compliance regime that you sort of bulk tag their email by role to archive it all for a certain period of time. All right, next slide. So the capture requirements that NARA is imposing is that email messages with attachments, threads, calendars, whatever, will all be captured by role. There'll be a classification system. There'll be a presumption that captured objects are records unless otherwise classified as non-record, and that metadata will be maintained and not overwritten by default processes. So there is a number of guidance if people are really interested in the NARA capstone. They can talk to me, or they can click on the archive site. It is one way to deal with email management. It's not the only way. Next slide, Mary. There's a bulletin out there that's not an imposition of one technology or one software for the government. NARA recognizes that there's a variety of approaches. Evolving technologies such as auto-categorization and advanced search may do a better job. We know that the artificial intelligence will be there in the future to do a better job of categorizing objects than we do now. But I'm happy to have a conversation offline with anyone about the need to do some measure of categorization and doing it automatically rather than relying on people. Next slide. The train wreck slide here is that if we're in a world where the default is either preserve everything or preserve nothing, then that doesn't work for the government. National Archives won't take every email from every agency. They want permanent and temporary records to be segregated out. Nor will they say it's okay to delete everything. And similarly, in the private sector realm, you don't want to be in a save everything default or save nothing default. We need to put some categories in place. We need software to do that, and we shouldn't be relying on people. Now, my favorite slide of this series coming up is one that I can't hear the reaction on the other end of the webinar for those. But avoiding shadow IT practices. I have named in my LTN column Hillary Clinton. Whether or not she becomes President of the United States, we don't know. But we do know one thing. She has been nominated by me to be Shadow IT Employee of the Year. So Mary, you can laugh. The fact is that Ms. Clinton went out and used a private network for 4 years during her time in public service. Whatever one thinks about the circumstances in doing so, the fact is she's not alone. There are surveys that show that on an increasing basis, high-level executives do, and all of us do, use things like Google Docs, Dropbox, Box as alternatives to official record-keeping systems. And we need to, as a governance conversation, we need to step back and ask the question of what is it that we are doing. We obviously want to be efficient in our jobs, and we want to be as competent as possible with a range of communications technologies and document systems. But query whether that's in the best interest of the institutions to be having a certain percentage of documents that are business records, or in the government's case, federal records, on the web in some sort of unstructured way that's not organized by IT. So we need to have a conversation about this, about what policies to be in place and the technology apps. I'm a big believer in email archiving for the government. I think that we have the tools in place, and I will turn it over to Jan to talk about ZyLAB's particular approach to this.
Yes, thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. Very interesting, very good overview. And let me continue here a little bit, focusing on the technology behind email archiving. There have been many organizations that have been archiving email for some time now, and they are running into a number of problems we see more or less all over the industry, not only government, also in the commercial space. Because there's a couple of technical challenges when you're archiving information. One of the main reasons why this has become a bigger challenge than in the past is that a lot of regulatory retention periods have become much longer recently, and they've become even longer than the average technical life of most email and enterprise information archiving solutions. So there's a chance, or it's very likely, that somewhere along the way you have to convert data from your old legacy electronic archive, which is no longer supported by the vendor that originally manufactured it, or you have to pay like ridiculous high maintenance and support fees, and then you're suddenly confronted with a very high conversion cost. It could also be that the vendor no longer exists, and you find out that your data actually is stored in a very proprietary internal data structure, and you're locked in a vendor lockup, and the only way to get your data out of the system is to hire a expensive specialized service provider, often charging you a few dollars per record to do the conversion. Now, one of the other things that not everybody understands, or not everybody realizes, is that there are a couple of requirements that you see, especially in business email archives, where users individually archive email, contrary to archives where there's like central email archives used for preservation and supervision and compliance monitoring and eDiscovery. is that a lot of these former systems use single instance storage, and they also use the ability to provide document-level security for business users in the system when they're looking up their email archive. Now, one of the problems is that these two requirements are kind of contradictory to the requirement that organizations also need to be able to disclose and find and search very large collections of email in very short times. And so sometimes you have to make a choice. What do you want? What's your biggest problem? Is it answering to regulatory requests? Do you need the preservation archive? Do you need the supervision archive, a records management archive, accessible for central records managers? Or do you need an archive that will help you to save disk space? Sometimes when the volumes are very high, it is not always possible, and especially single instance storage and very proprietary document level security kind of operations may also create vendor lockup and very slow performance when you disclose data for an eDiscovery or regulatory request. Now, let me see if I can take it to the next slide. There we go. Yeah. So what Mary did, Mary wrote a great white paper about these challenges. And Mary made some calculation, which you can see here, which show you these technical challenges. What you see here in the top table is the number of mailboxes, and then the average cost of the number of migrations. So if you have like 1,000 mailboxes on the first row and you do 2 migrations, you will probably spend about $108,000. But, you know, most far extreme, if you have 75,000 mailboxes and you have to do 5 migrations, you have to include $20 million in cost. Now, how can you calculate the number of migrations? Now, you can do that by using the information in the second table, where you see the retention period on the vertical dimension, and then you see the useful life, the economic life, or the technical life of an average archive in 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, or 100 years. Now, suppose that you have like a 7-year technical life cycle of a product, and you need to keep your records 7 years. You know, you may get away with no conversions, but if you look in the federal government, where a lot of retention periods can be up to 50 or even 100 years, it could be that you're looking up to like 40 conversions, which is even more than we have in our table at the top of this page. So you can understand that it's very important that email or data that has to be kept for such a long time is archived in an open, sustainable, non-proprietary format, which is not owned by a vendor, but which is an open standard. And this is exactly what we do at ZyLAB. We've been working a lot with the United Nations war crimes tribunals who have to keep their records forever. We work with the National Security Council, Executive Office of the President, where files have to be kept for a very long time. And this is the reason why we've always chosen to archive our data in open file formats like XML, which are sustainable, they're secure, used in the right environment, they're enduring, and it's very easy to archive almost any type of information in this format. And by doing this, you really avoid vendor lookup whenever you archive email and also other type of electronic information. Now, what we see is that there's a lot of drivers why organizations need to sustainable or archive information these days. One of them is the increasing number of regulatory inquiries for enterprises and commercial organizations. But you know, all organizations suffer from HR cases, federal rules of civil procedure, civil and criminal lawsuits, internal security issues, data which is stored in the wrong place and may not be encrypted where it had to be encrypted, and then suddenly it's out of the street by error. Public request, a big problem for the government. FOIA, public records request, it's very similar to the same problems, actually it is similar to the same problems that we see for corporates in federal rules of civil procedure requests. And then within the government there's also congressional parliamentary inquiries, as we call them in Europe, and congressional inquiries in the U.S. There's regulatory and law enforcement investigations from law enforcement agencies, attorney general offices, regulators, and all of these result in a process where you have to identify, collect, organize, sort, review, redact, and disclose very high volumes of information in a very short time. And that's much easier if you have an archive. If you have a preservation archive, you can keep track of your legal holds. You can keep track of what you disclosed. You can retain data, as Jason explained, and you can follow all the guidelines and all the regulations that are out there. And that's what we highly encourage to do at ZyLAB. Now, one of the developments that we've seen and that everybody's experienced, of course, is the whole movement into the cloud. And this is something where we have a special solution. Suppose that email, which is still, as Jason explained, the major source of data used for all of these discovery, FOIA, investigative type of processes. And let's take a look at Exchange. And many organizations have a eDiscovery solution for on-premise. And with this eDiscovery solution, they can disclose data and organize, find, identify everything according to the EDRM model and disclose data to a third party. Now, what happens if your organization moves to the cloud, to 365, SharePoint, or Exchange in the cloud? In that moment, at ZyLAB, what we have is we offer you a solution that you can also do your eDiscovery in the cloud. Because why do you want to bring down what's up? This is why we have developed our technology in such a way that it's very easy for us to deploy it as well on-premise. It's a very scalable, very high-performance software that we can scale horizontally and deal with very, very high data volumes. But we can deploy exactly the same software in a cloud, in a private cloud, in Amazon Web Services, or in Microsoft Azure. And so in that case, what you can do your whole eDiscovery process, your identification, collection, processing, review in the cloud, and then you only bring down what you need to disclose to a third party. Now, of course, we're very flexible. If you want to bring it down, we can bring it down. Or if you still have some sources on-premise that you want to review in the cloud, we can also bring it up. And this is a very flexible solution for organizations. And at ZyLAB, we've put a lot of effort in making sure that our software runs just as good in the cloud as it runs on-premise. And we see a huge interest here, especially for organizations who are migrating to 365 in the cloud. Our eDiscovery solution is a natural fit to that type of email archives. Okay. Now there's as Jason said, we can no longer process all this data manually. We can no longer tackle this data manually. So we have to use technology to fight the data volumes, which are more or less also created by technology. And this is why artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive coding, and also rules-based applications have been used. And one of the important things is that users are always aware that all this technology is not like a free lunch. You have to make it defensible. You have to do manual verification by lawyers. And this is also a process which is very well explained in the movie in which Jason features the first decade of discovery. And this is something, kind of functionality that we've also built into our technology. And we can use this technology not only for automatic tagging, but also for automatic redaction and for other automated processes. In each of these cases, whenever you apply an automated process, you can use verification by lawyers or records managers or paralegals to assess the quality of the automatic processes. Now, we live in a global world, and there are many different languages. So this is one of the reasons why we have integrated machine translation in our software. So every document that occurs in a foreign language which will automatically be detected by our software, and then we can translate it into English for I think about 40 language pairs. You can always go back to the original language, an original document, and try to read it if you understand the language. But there will be a direct online translation available for you to search and review in your own language. This is very high-performance software. We can do it on-premise, so if you have classified documents, you don't have to worry about documents being uploaded to a cloud or a public cloud. And it's very fast. This technology is translating 5,000 pages an hour on just one CPU. And it can also be scaled horizontally. Some other examples, audio search. The time that we only have text is more or less past. There's more and more multimedia. Audio not only being part of audio files or voicemails that are forwarded from your phone system, or voicemails that are present on the phone system, which in most cases is a Linux computer somewhere in your network, or audio components of videos. And what we can do is we can search this video. There's no need to transcribe it. We can search it. We use a phonetic technology for, we can apply this to a variety of languages. And it has a very high recall, high precision, which is also user settable by a threshold value. And then we can use exactly the same interface as we use for reviewing textual documents like emails or files or images or any type. And we can, as you see on this image here, also take them as responsive, not responsive, privileged, and you even see those red bars there in the timeline, which are the hits. It's like that we found for a particular word we searched for in this case. And it's very transparent. In the system you can say, well, do you want to search? You want to search text, or you want to search audio? And everything's fully automatic. You know, ask us for a demo. It's really one of the more exciting parts of our components software that we have. And then, very important, we have a variety of rules and patterns and libraries that we use for organizations that want to do a supervise or supervision review. And you can do supervision for a variety of policies. One could be that all of the protected health information or personal identifiable information, PII or PHI, is archived on particular encrypted file systems. Or what you can do is you can say, well, you know, I want to look for certain privacy-sensitive data. I am interested in intellectual property, confidential data, whatever data, and then we can automatically search all of your data locations everywhere in your network or in the archives for this type of data which has been misrepresented. And here you see a couple of examples of documents in the Enron set with a variety of social security numbers. You may all know the Enron data set contains over 18,000 documents that shouldn't have been in there because they contain highly sensitive information on individuals, including medical information and a lot of other types of PHI protected information. And we can also redact. We can redact manually, we can redact automatically. And that will be a major money and time saver for you and your organization, especially in combination with our verification. We're already there, right? You want to take over, Mary?
Oh, yeah, we are there. I have a question, Jan, for you, and I have a couple for you, Jason, as well. Jan, are you saying that when you're archiving, that the system would automatically flag if a record had personally identifiable information, so anybody else who went in would see that flag?
Yeah,
and be warned?
We can absolutely flag all those, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and Jason, I've got one for you. It's 2016 is next year. What is your assessment of how the government is doing getting everything online?
Oh, I'd much rather say that offline. I have urged the Archivists of the United States to do more in this area through the platform I have of the Information Governance Initiative. We have an open letter to NARA stressing the urgency of the moment, and I certainly am extremely supportive of what the Archivists of LMB and President Obama have done. But time is getting short, and there is a budget cycle in Washington that is well known, and if one doesn't put in for extra funds or to account on a line item about what any associated costs would be, then there are issues. You can't just turn on a switch on December 30th. 2016, there are special rules in place for appropriations, and so this is an issue. But of course, people of goodwill are working through it. I think, quite candidly, the controversies that we have experienced over the last year or more, starting with the IRS, with crashes of hard drives and difficulties in recovering email, as well as Secretary of State Clinton's practices with respect to her email, have only served to highlight the importance of getting it right. And getting it right for the government means thinking seriously about capstone, about first level solutions, role-based and will-based solutions for archiving, and then putting into place other types of software that will account for eDiscovery collections of FOIA and otherwise, and integrated solutions. And so there needs to be a high-level conversation within government, as well as what I'm advocating outside of government too, which is greater attention to preservation requirements by the C-suite. Certainly the government has a very, very large task ahead to meet. Now, if December 31, 2016 comes and only half the government has accomplished what the directive says, I personally would declare victory if I were the archivist. I can't speak for him, for David Ferriero, but it does seem to me that we just need to treat this as a matter of urgency and priority to make sure that we have open government, and that ultimately we have a record of the Obama administration, a record of the history of the 21st century. That's, from the public sector, that's the bottom line here, that email archiving is really the only means that exists to do an adequate job of preserving history. And in the corporate world, there are other pressures on institutions and other regulatory requirements, but we all have some demands on us to preserve what we're doing for a lot of purposes, and hopefully the government will step up and meet its mandate.
Jason, we have a question about how do you get somebody that you report to or several layers up to stop using systems that are not archived? That this is the shadow IT problem that you were talking about.
Well, first you have to recognize that they're doing it, and that's where some people have certainly had questions about, certainly at the State Department, who knew and who was advising officials as to what are best practices in this area. I think it's if you're sitting at a records manager level or a middle level in government, it's very, very difficult to have that conversation going up the line. What we all need is champions. One place to start is lawyers. I know I'm highly biased because that's the degree I have, but it does seem to me that a general counsel or someone in a legal department who is entrusted in giving advice with respect to what are the record-keeping requirements in a public sector place should be aware of the fact that there are laws out there like FOIA and the Federal Records Act that govern one's responsibilities, and so that's one place to start. Clearly, a CIO is another place, or a COO of an agency. Got to find somebody who really will champion these causes and be able to be close enough to those assistants to a secretary who can get in the door and have a conversation with the top people. Ultimately, however, if there really is a problem in terms of compliance, there's always in many cases there is going to the Inspector General. But that elevates an issue which might well be able to be handled in other ways.
No, thank you. So we're coming to the end of our our broadcast here. And the slide that we have up has a link to it. That is the Information Governance Initiative survey page. All of you are welcome and encouraged to take that survey. It's a benchmarking survey, and the results will be made public by the Information Governance Initiative. And it may help you in your practice, and it may help you make the business case that you need to drive corporate behavior change or institutional behavior change, or to business cases around systems or process or headcount. Jason, do you want to say a couple words about the impact that the first survey had?
Well, the Information Governance Initiative is this forum for having a smart conversation about governance of data. And the survey last year was taken by many, many hundreds of individuals, led to the publication of the 2014 annual report by the IGI, which is available just as a download at iginitiative.com. And we will be producing a 2015 annual report based on the results of this year's survey. It doesn't take a lot to participate, and it will really be valuable to us to hear how policies and practices are actually playing out in the real world. So I encourage everyone to take the survey.
And then also let your friends know to take the survey as well. And then we talked a little bit in the webcast about email archiving and the costs of migrations. Those charts that you saw earlier about useful life versus retention period, and then some other interesting information I pulled together in combination with my colleagues, and it's email archiving, your first step towards enterprise information archiving, and you can get that by just emailing Annelore Vanderlint at ZyLAB.com, ANNELORE.VANDERLINT at ZYLAB.com. I'd be happy to send that over to you. And Jason and Jan, thank you very much for the webcast today. Thank you to the Information Governance Institute as well. And thank you all for your kind attention.